Well, sorry about that, folks. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this forum with the incoming superintendent for the Prescott Unified School District. My name is Tracy Benson. I'm the Associate Executive Director for the Arizona School Boards Association. It was our honor to work with the governing board of the district in their search for a new superintendent. I'm joined this evening by my colleague, Dr. Mark Jornstad, who was the lead search consultant on the search. This evening is a representation of what I think was a priority of the governing board in the search for a new superintendent, that was ensuring community and staff participation and transparency. And from the start of the process, the governing board was certain about the fact that they wanted to make sure that the community and staff were a part of hearing from candidates and now, of course, your new incoming superintendent. Thank you to those of you who submitted questions this evening. Many of you did. We're going to try to get to as many of them as we possibly can. You may hear your question summarized. There are a few in this stack that are very similar, so I'm going to do my best to summarize some of those. We have got an hour together, and we've got some folks I know who are joining us virtually. So if you're joining us virtually, welcome. Thanks for being with us this evening. Before we dig into the questions, I would like to invite the incoming superintendent, Mr. Clark Tenney, to provide some welcoming remarks.
Great. Thank you, Tracy. Thanks. Appreciate that. Thank you for coming tonight. We wanted to do this forum and have an opportunity for people to ask questions and get to know me a little bit better if you don't know me well yet. We didn't know exactly how many people would come. We knew we wouldn't need a 900-seat theater. That has turned out to be the case for sure. But we didn't know if we would have 30 people or 60 people. And we don't really have a venue that, if we're anticipating more than about 45 people anywhere in the district, that works well, other than our two theaters. Our theater at the high school is being used very well this evening for preparations for the Sound of Music that's going to be put on over the next couple of days. Super excited about that. I've seen a couple of their dress rehearsals. It's pretty neat. If you have an opportunity, I would really encourage you to stop by and see that and support those great kids and staff members who are part of that. And then our other option was here at Mile High. So welcome to the Cavern, and we're glad to have you here with us tonight. So many of you know me, but if you don't, I'll just introduce myself really briefly. My name is Clark Tenney, and I've lived here in Prescott for, I think this is going on year 40 for us. I moved here when I was fairly young. I'll have to tell you, I kind of came kicking and screaming. My parents said, okay, we're moving to Arizona. I said, oh no, lizards and cactus and rocks, and please don't. But we moved here, and wow, what a great place to be. I'm sure you have all found the same thing. Within days, I was sold. For sure, and I've been here mostly ever since. As I was attending college up in Brigham Young University up in Utah, I was working in an office. One day we had a phone call at the office, and it was a local high school, and they had just lost one of their teachers. This is not an uncommon theme that's been going on for decades across the United States, but anyhow, they lost one of their teachers. He taught Japanese for them. I happened to be a Japanese speaker. I served a mission for our church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Japan, for a couple of years, and then studied Japanese in college. So I'm unusual in that I'm American, as you can see, but I speak Japanese. Anyhow, they were looking for a Japanese teacher and called the other guy. The other guy picked up the phone in the office, and they said, oh my gosh, is there anybody there? BYU is well known for its language programs. Is there anybody there that you could point us to that speaks Japanese? He goes, yeah, there's actually somebody right here. So I got on the phone with them. Long story short, took a position with them teaching two or three classes of Japanese just part-time. Needed the money desperately. My wife and I got married when we were in college, and I think we may have had one on the way at that point. I don't know. But at any rate, we needed money for sure, for tuition, et cetera. And I said, I'll do it. And so showed up at Pleasant Grove High School in Utah, and within like a couple of days, I was hooked. I was like, I love this. This is what I'm going to do. I thought I was going to do something else, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to teach. I love it. And essentially the rest of my life has been devoted to that. I taught for 22 years in the classroom, Utah for a few years, and then I was fortunate to find a position at a fairly prestigious international school, private school in Tokyo, Japan, and we spent our school years there. It was called the American School in Japan, not a very original or clever name, but it was mostly American kids, about 1,500 of them, and I taught Japanese to American kids there. So we spent our school years there. We came home here to Prescott in the summers. We were able to homes weren't quite as expensive back then, so we were able to purchase a home and spend our summers and Christmases here back and forth for several years. And then started teaching at Prescott High School. We decided we want to move back to America. We're fairly patriotic, love to be here where my wife and I both grew up. And so we moved home, got a job teaching American government and American history at Prescott High School. That's half of what I had taught when I was teaching up in Utah. That's what my minor is in college. Did that for a couple of years, and then we started a Japanese program that was pretty successful at the high school for several years as well. So taught at Prescott High School for 7 years, and in the meantime got my principal certificate. And our children went to Abaya Judd Elementary School. My wife Sonia's here tonight. We have 5 children. 4 of them went to Abaya Judd Elementary School. The 5th was older than that when we moved back. At any rate, we loved it, knew it was a great community. So when that principal position came open, I thought this will be a great opportunity for me to get maybe some interview experience. I can at least, brush up my resume and toss it in. Well, I was very surprised to be selected. We had 27 applicants, so I thought, well, this isn't going anywhere, but maybe I'll get an interview, and sure enough, I did. Anyhow, I was at Abaya Judd for 4 years. Loved that, absolutely loved that. And after a few years, Mr. Howard, our superintendent, said, hey, we need to make some leadership changes in the district. Would you be willing to go over to the high school and work with Mark Goligoski? He'll be the principal. You can assist him there. Did that for a few years. Loved that as well. So great to be back with my colleagues there. And after a couple of years, they asked me to move to the district office, and I've been doing that for a few years as well as our HR director and assistant superintendent. I was very enthusiastic about the opportunity to apply for this position when it came open, and really grateful to be among, I think we had 10 initial applicants, narrowed it down to be selected by the board. So that's why I'm here tonight, and here to talk with you, and I'm super excited to do so. Again, we don't have a lot of people here, which is, I don't know if that's a bad sign or a good sign. I'm taking it as a good sign. We had 842 people who replied to our initial survey. What do you want to see in a superintendent? I think most of the drama has gone out of it for people. They knew they weren't going to see the Jerry Springer show, so they didn't show up. That is great as far as I'm concerned. And I hope this will be far from the last time that I'll have an opportunity to listen to ideas that people have, answer questions that people have, et cetera. That's a commitment of mine for sure, that I would like to do that going forward. I'll just share really briefly before we get into the good questions I'm sure you have. I serve on the city council as well. About a month ago, this is an anecdote that a couple of you heard in our last meeting, but we were interviewing city manager candidates, and there were several good ones. We narrowed it down to some finalists, and we had a search consultant who worked with us. Kathy will remember this. We had a search consultant who worked with us, and he was just giving us a little bit of insight into how things had gone in their first round of interviews, and they'd gone really well with most of them. Of one of the candidates, this person wasn't given to hyperbole. He wasn't one of these, rah, I'm going to say funny things all the time. We asked, how did it go with candidate, B or C or whatever it was? And he said, I don't think in my time as a search consultant I've ever witnessed a more spectacular misuse of an opportunity to make a positive impression. I thought, whoa. So I hope that is not the case for me this evening, that this won't be a spectacular misuse of my opportunity to make a positive impression. Turns out we didn't go with that candidate. Is that right? The candidate we got was great, and you're going to have a great new city manager, just so you know. That's not the direction that we went. Okay.
All right, thank you for that.
You bet.
So many of the topics you touched on in your remarks are included in the questions. I'm going to start with one about teachers, because clearly you have a heart for the classroom. How will you go about retaining and recruiting the best teachers? And maybe if you could extrapolate too about all those folks in the district who support them.
You bet. I love that question. So I may have mentioned, I think I did, that I'm our human resources director in our district right now. So this is what I do every day, all day long, is focus on recruiting and retaining good staff, teachers first and foremost, but folks who support them as well, principals, paraprofessionals, et cetera. And so it's a question that's close to my heart. I'll start by sharing a context that many of you are probably familiar with. I think it was just last week, the Education Law Center in the United States came out with a ranking of states in terms of the amount of funding that they offer per pupil for education. And Arizona, so all 50 states in the District of Columbia. And many of you know Arizona doesn't fare well in those types of rankings. Well, it fared particularly poorly this time around, in spite of all of the additional money that has gone into education over the last several years in Arizona. We're dead last. We're 51st out of 51. So that's kind of the context that we're dealing with in terms of recruiting and retaining. It makes it especially challenging when there's just not a lot of money to go around to be able to say, hey, come to the lowest paid state in the United States. It's sunny. That said, I am consistently gratified and frankly amazed that we get terrific teachers here in Arizona generally, and especially here in Prescott. We have great, great people. I've spent, one of our major advantages here is our district enjoys a very positive reputation here in our region and statewide. So we have a lot of people who come to us, and I hear pretty regularly, I've always wanted to teach in Prescott. I hear such great things. I know the leadership is great. I understand the schools are great. You've got great families. You've got great kids, and there's pine trees, and it snows, hooray. So there's things that draw people other than our schools, but our district enjoys a very good reputation. So because of that, we don't have the issues with turnover that many other districts have. Right now, you're probably aware there are over 2,000 teaching positions in Arizona as we speak that are not filled with a certified teacher. Some of those, like we've got 5 of those here in Prescott, we filled them with long-term substitute teachers who have the skill set, they just don't have the certification yet. A lot of districts are not able to do that at all, particularly in rural areas in Arizona. They'll double up classes. They were going to have a class of 25 and a class of 25, and now they have a class of 50. Or they'll take 5 classes and combine them into 4, that type of a thing. They'll take people who were supposed to be the administrator over, here's our assistant special education director, and that person can't do that this year. We can't give the attention to that we need to because they're going to be in the special education classroom instead. It's not a situation where kids are just running feral through the hallways, right, because we don't have 200 teachers. There are things that schools do. We're fortunate not to have to do that here so far. We tend to get really good folks. Our retention rate for teachers this year was 87% of folks coming back, and that's with all of our retirements and our resignations. That is spectacular. I talk with a lot of HR directors. I'm not aware of another district in the entire state that's in that situation. It's just great that people want to come back here. So it speaks really well of several different things, but it's high on my mind. How will I do that? We have been assiduous over the last several years of looking at the relatively low funding that we get from the state and saying, what's the best way to use this? And you will find as you look at the Auditor General's report for Prescott Unified School District online that we're among the best in the state for money that comes to us that goes into our classrooms. And we're among the lowest in the state for money that comes to us that goes to administration and things like food service and things like that. You can be too low for all those things, right? Eventually, if you get too low for administration, you're like our neighboring districts that are having a hard time hiring people at all. But we do a good job with your tax dollars. We make sure they go to the right places, and first and foremost to teachers. As a result of that, in spite of the fact that we're one of the districts in Arizona that has not been able to get our community behind us to pass what's called a budget override, perversely here in Arizona. We haven't been able to do that recently. In spite of that, we have increased our teacher salaries, and along with them, they correlate very carefully, our other staff salaries to now we're finally, for the first time in the history of the universe, we're above the state average for teachers. The state average is in the high 58,000s, and we're in the low 59,000s. First time ever this last year. We're super pleased with that. And that is something that will help. People don't go into education to be rich. Nobody did that. When I fell in love with those kids at Pleasant Grove High School in Utah, I came home and told my wife and said, we're never going to be rich. She said, I don't care. I just want us to be happy. And that has certainly been the case for sure. You don't go into education to be rich, but you do want to be compensated well enough to have a reasonable living and live in a nice place like Prescott. And we have been making significant efforts in that direction over the years. And our reputation is continuing to hold up in terms of having great administrators and great colleagues to work with, et cetera. And so far, we're in a much better position than most other districts in Arizona. We hope that will continue to be the case. We've got lots of plans for how to keep that going in terms of how we compensate people and the district culture that we continue.
All right, thank you for that. So you mentioned that you're on the city council. Explain how important a successful school system is for the economic success of the community in terms of attracting employers, doctors, general quality of life.
Sure, yeah, so this is a common sense thing, but there's a tremendous amount of data to show that if you want a strong community, you need to have a strong community school system. As you know, we've got a number of really wonderful folks who are retirement age in our community, and they don't have kids in our school district. And so some of them are very interested in what we do and want to help and advise and things like that. We appreciate that. Some people are just not interested, but they should be interested for sure. Whether or not we're able to recruit great doctors, for instance, to be able to recruit and retain great doctors here in Prescott is dependent in no small part on our quality school system. People like Dr. Roosting want to make sure that their kids have great schools to go to so they can go off to success in the future. That's certainly the case that way. It also is an attractive thing to people. It increases real estate values. Some people love that, some people don't, but it increases real estate values to have successful schools. So we're very pleased to be a school system that has among the highest test scores in the state and to enjoy the reputation that we've enjoyed over the years.
Yeah. Well, you've answered the next question that I was going to ask. So way to be a visionary question answerer.
Okay. All right, good.
The question is, how are PUSD schools performing compared to the rest of the state? The second part of the question is, how will you address any areas of deficit?
Oh, yeah. So I really appreciate both of those questions. So as I've mentioned, well, if you look online at the Auditor General's report for a number of things, again, spending, how we do for spending, our class sizes compared to other districts in the state, et cetera, one of the things you'll see is our aggregate test scores for English Language Arts, or ELA, we sometimes say for short, science and math. And you can see the percentage of students who are in a category that they call passing. There's highly performing and performing, highly proficient, and then our two categories that they don't consider proficient. The tests that students take for our standardized tests in Arizona, those of you who've been in education for a long time can attest to this, they change frequently. We used to have test scores actually throughout the state and certainly in Prescott that were in the 80s were really common, and now those test scores are more in the 40s, and some people think, holy smokes, every kid got stupid really quick, or boy, you used to hire great teachers, now you hire terrible ones, or you must have had a great curriculum before and now you must have a terrible curriculum. Just flip the switch on that. It's certainly more nuanced and complicated than that, but an analogy that may resonate with some of you is we used to ask our students on those standardized tests to if we were shooting baskets, to shoot from the free throw line. We got pretty proficient at that. We would train kids, okay, here's what you need to do on the math test and the science test. Here's the things that you need to know. Here's the skills that you need to have. And we got to the point where 83% of our kids were making it from the free throw line, so to speak. The tests have changed over the years. The bar, so to speak, that kids need to cross to what's called passing is substantially different these days, and it's more like shooting from the three-point line. It's not like they're being asked to shoot from half court. Almost nobody can make it ever, but it is substantially more challenging than it used to be. Is it the same set of skills? Essentially, right? You're still shooting the basket, or is it the same goal? Yep, you want it to go in the basket, but the bar has been raised, so to speak, or the line has been moved back, so to speak. And so you will see that districts statewide that used to score in the 70s and 80s, like Prescott Unified, now are scoring in the 30s and 40s. And if you're used to, and you have the frame of reference for 30%, that's abject failure. On the one hand, you might say that's the case. On the other hand, it's probably useful. The best comparisons that we have then are to say, okay, well, everybody's shooting from the three-point line now. What does that look like for other districts? And so we do a lot of comparing ourselves to our neighboring districts who have similar demographics and teaching staffs and whatnot. And we do a lot of comparing ourselves to the county and to the state, and we compare very favorably. For science, we're in all three areas, we're firmly in the top tier of districts in the state of Arizona. For science, we're in the top 14% of districts in Arizona. That's very solid. For ELA, English Language Arts, we're in the top 16% of districts, also very solid. For math, we're in the top 24% of districts. Also quite good in some respects, but hopefully as I shared that data, you saw right away, there is a gap between how we're performing. We're absolutely you might say, in the elite of districts in Arizona for science and English Language Arts, but for math, we're just really pretty good. And this is Prescott. We should be more than really pretty good. And it is true that years ago, when everybody was scoring in the 70s and 80s, we didn't have as big a gap between our ELA scores and our math scores as we do now. So The other part of your question, I believe, and it's a great question that has been asked, is what do we do about that? Is it a good time for my treadmill analogy, do you think?
Love it.
All right. I shared an analogy in the previous forum, and I'll do that again really quick. And I apologize. I'm hopeful to get to all questions. I won't go on quite this long in all of them, but this two-part question is very important. Let me first say that every decision we make in our district, it is certainly the case now, and it will be going forward, I commit to you, will be looked at through two lenses. What keeps kids safe and what helps kids be successful. And so we need to look and say, is the top 24% of districts in Arizona for math good enough? I think the answer to that is no, particularly given that our other scores are in the top essentially 15% of districts. So what do we do about that? I've pondered that a lot. We've looked at things. I will tell you this, when the test scores come back, we don't say, well, that's too bad. We better come up with an excuse for that. We dig in literally the next day, and we look at all the strands. Which of the areas are we strong in? Which of the areas are we weak in? Which of the areas are our fifth graders performing well, but our eighth graders are not? And why would that be the case, et cetera? There's several parts of that, and I can address a number of those in more depth with anybody who's interested later. But I'll share with you, if I can, an analogy that was shared with me recently by a good friend of mine. He's actually a distant cousin as well. His name is Tenney. Some of you know Harold. Harold was a principal in our local area for a long time. He's been a principal at the high school level, middle school level, and elementary school level. Long career in education, just a good guy. He's one of the best people I know. And I was visiting with him, I don't know, a few weeks ago, and he shared this with me. His wife's name is Kitty. Many of you know Kitty as well. And he said, Clark, this is super interesting. A few weeks ago, Kitty came home from Goodwill with a treadmill. And it looked like a pretty nice one. It cost her $50. If you've ever shopped at Goodwill, if something costs you $50, you're going high end. So this is a pretty nice looking treadmill. They were excited. They're getting older. They want to keep fit. And so set the treadmill up in the garage, plugged it in, turned on the switch, and it didn't work. Nothing happened. And Kitty was really frustrated. She said, oh, Harold, would you come look at this for me? And sure, yeah, he looked. He plugs it in again, and he flips the switch again. Nothing is working. And they were really frustrated. Said, well, Kitty, this is what you get when you buy a treadmill at Goodwill. You don't need to do that. We're doing okay. You could have gotten one, online or gone down to whatever and got yourself a new. What are you doing buying this treadmill? Now we got to get rid of it. And she said, well, okay, I'll help you. We'll put it on the trailer and go to the dump. I said, no way. We're not going to the dump with this. They'll charge me $15. I'm not going to do that. He's a pretty frugal guy. He's a little bit like me. So instead, he got out his toolkit, and he started to disassemble the treadmill. He started to take it apart bit by bit. And the pieces that he could recycle, he recycled. The pieces he had to throw away, he threw away. There were several parts of it that were welded together. It didn't matter what socket wrench he put on. That was not coming apart. So he got his sledgehammer out, and he started beating that apart. And eventually he got it all, a lot of work, sweating, big deal, got it all put away. And over the course of about 3 weeks, they were able to put it just in their regular trash and get it to go to the dump. And he thought, that's a great success. Okay, well, I'm glad we don't have to deal with that again. Well, a couple weeks later, Kitty shows up at home again with another treadmill from Goodwill. How much did this one cost? This one's $55. It's better. Like, all right, go ahead. So she plugs it in, she turns it on, and you guessed it, nothing. It didn't work at all. And Kitty was frustrated. Harold was so frustrated, and he immediately took to disassembling this one as well. He took it all apart. He got the socket wrenches going again, and his pliers and a hammer and a sledgehammer, and same thing. Eventually got rid of it. Let me back up. Before he did that, before he started to do that, and Kitty said, Harold, stop. Let's try something. She unplugged it from the plug that it was in, moved it over to another plug in the garage, and sure enough, it worked just fine. He was all ready to disassemble it a second time. Pardon me, I got ahead of myself in the story. And it worked just fine. This thing that they thought was a total mess that he was ready to dump a second time and go to all this trouble actually worked just fine. They didn't know what was wrong with it. They didn't realize that all we have to do is this. To me, that's a little bit like our math scores. We've got to figure out what's wrong. And whether it's math scores or whether it's our approach to special education or whether it's conversations with our community, whether it's something happening today or whether it's something happening 5 years from now, I think it behooves us to dig in deeply and find out what is the issue before we pull out the sledgehammer and the socket wrenches and junk it. We have people in our community who suggested your math curriculum is a dumpster fire. You just got to get rid of that. If you would do that, everything would be fine. Perhaps that's the case. Perhaps that's the case. but perhaps there's a different issue, and we need to get our stakeholders together, the people who know the most about it, and figure that out together. We're very open to input from anybody in the community who thinks they've got a good idea. A lot of us have been to the doctor, and so, but it doesn't qualify us to give medical advice or to practice as a doctor. All of us have been to school, and somehow many of us have come to the conclusion that qualifies us to advise professionals in the education area. We're most interested in people who have the most experience with those kinds of things for sure, but we are very interested in everybody's opinions on things, particularly things that matter to all of us. And as I've suggested, education, I think, matters deeply to all of us in our community. So what are we going to do about math scores? What are we going to do about test scores? Well, we're going to dig in deep and find out what's the problem first, and then we'll fix it. Maybe not pull out the sledgehammer first.
All right. In the response to that question, you mentioned special education. We know that each student is unique. Every single student in the district is unique, but some of our students have special needs that provide additional challenges. What is your thought on providing excellence in service and support to those special education students in the district?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a challenging issue. I think it comes down to several different things, like whether we're dealing with a student who's got what's called an individual education plan. They've been identified as having some kind of an issue where they need additional support to be successful in school, or whether it's a student that's strictly general education. And I will make the point that all of our students are general education students first and foremost, and then there's a subset of them that also have issues and needs that go beyond typical students, and we need to meet those as well. At any rate, I think whether we're dealing with strictly gen ed kids or SPED kids, sometimes we call them for short, it's a team game. We need to work with parents, we need to work with teachers, we need to work with administrators, we need to work with service providers like educational psychologists, occupational therapists, if the situation calls for it, et cetera, and then sit down and come up with that plan. Again, it's called an individual education plan. There's a reason for that because it's different for every student. There is no one size fits all. Because we don't have a lot of resources, and because there are things that have been proven over time to work well, we do a lot of one size fits all in education. That works relatively well for some of our general education pieces and less well for most of our special education pieces. So we need to be looking more at what that means. What does individualized education mean? Does the program that we have set up for other students work well for this student, or does it not? Do we need to tweak that to meet those needs the best? So those are the questions that we ask. Fortunately, we have experts that do that they dig in deeply to that every day. We've hired just this year a new Director of Exceptional Student Services, our special education department, Dr. Harris from Ohio. He's brought a new perspective to things, which we really appreciate. We've allocated additional resources to our special education department in the form of hiring an Assistant Director of Special Education, Ms. Christine Felton, who's been one of our very, very successful teachers over the years, and her perspective will help us a great deal as we work together to determine how do we help every kid succeed. We've been pretty good over the years at sending kids off to Cornell and Stanford and Brigham Young University, places like that for sure, and our in-state universities. We need to be looking top to bottom at how we can help every kid be successful. Take them where they're at and take them as far as they can go together.
So you mentioned a team approach for supporting special education students. Parents are a required part of that team, right, but we know that they are an incredibly important part of student success. Absolutely. For every student in the district. So if you would talk a little bit about building public support and getting more parent engagement and support for their students and the schools in general.
Yeah, I really appreciate that question as well. It is absolutely the case. Again, common sense, but there's all sorts of data, and our experience certainly shows that the more involved a student's parents are, the more likely they are to be successful. There's a lot of circular logic with that, but it is absolutely the case. Like most every school district that I'm aware of, at the elementary school level, we tend to have a lot of parent input and activity and support, and that wanes as kids become more independent. It's natural and it's probably appropriate for there to be a little less of that going forward. But the more programs that we have that invite and bring parents to schools, that helps us a tremendous amount as well. When I was the principal at Abaya Judd Elementary School, we had a very, very involved parent-teacher association. They just, I can't describe how tremendously they helped our school culture and our academic success. One of our former PTA presidents is here in the audience tonight. She's the kind of person who has been supportive of her students and supportive of other people's students for many, many years. The more folks that we have like that, the more successful we'll be. And that's part of our successful model over the years in PUSD. Why are we so well regarded over the years? Why have we been so successful over the years? We have a high level of parent involvement generally. How do we continue that? How do we continue to encourage that? Just the things that I've mentioned so far. When we have programs that draw parents to school, they feel involved and they want to be there. A question was asked in the earlier forum, and I don't know if it will be asked again here, but I'll touch on that briefly because I feel it's important as well. How do we continue to keep our enrollment stable in an environment where you probably know we're at the epicenter of the charter school universe here in Prescott. There are more charter schools per capita in Arizona than any other state in the United States, and there are more charter schools per capita in Yavapai County than any other county in Arizona. So there's a tremendous number of options for people out there. With that, we're very gratified that the vast majority of students attend our school district. And in fact, hundreds of students from our neighboring districts also attend our school district and our schools, and we're grateful for that. So we need to keep doing the things that bring people to our schools. Again, focus on test scores, focus on programs that bring people. A big part of enrollment is options. There are people who say, hey, I could go over to this charter school here, but there's like 4 things that my kid can do, and they're gonna have homework all night long. Or I can come to PUSD where I know there's terrific success throughout the spectrum for kids, and they've got strong special education programs, they've got early college, they've got dual enrollment, they've got advanced placement, they've got ROTC, they've got high-level athletics, they've got excellent fine arts, etc. So we try to, it kind of bites us a little bit occasionally, but we try to be all things to all people. And as we do that, I think that continues our tradition of parent support as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for that. So this is a very specific question, but I'm going to broaden it just a little bit, okay? This has to do with therapy dog programs, and I don't know if the person who submitted that is still here, but there was a fabulous, yes, okay, therapy dog here in the room. The question is, will you rethink the therapy dog program? But I would extend that to ask about the many supports for students who need additional kinds of support to be successful at school, in addition to academics.
Okay.
If you could just touch on some
Yeah,
of
as far as therapy
that.
dogs, I'm not exactly sure which of the 3 directions of therapy dog support or programs that we support in our school district. We're talking about, there's at least 3 that I'm aware of, probably not this first one. We have a number of students who, at the high school over the years have helped train therapy dogs. They've helped train service animals. That's probably not what's being talked about, but we're super supportive of that. Can that potentially be a little disruptive? Potentially, but we talk with the kids, we talk with those families, we talk with the kids in each class, and we say, this is a great service that this young person is trying to provide to a broader community. Let's support this, and let's stay focused on what's important, and let's not interfere with that training. So we do a bunch of that. We have students who have service animals. That's probably not what's being talked about, but I want to be thorough if I can. And absolutely, we're supportive of that. There are, probably what this question is addressing is therapy dogs that occasionally come when a traumatic experience has happened in our high school or our middle school or an elementary school or whatnot. We don't just say, hey, it's Tuesday, let's bring the therapy dogs in. That can be disruptive, and frankly, it's not the main focus of what we're trying to do. Again, we'll look at things through the 2 lenses of safety and academic success for our students first and foremost. Having dogs come in that kids can pet all the time is probably not right at the center of those missions. However, there are scenarios, and we've had a couple of them recently, where a student is killed in a tragic accident, or there's been some other kind of trauma that is widespread in our schools. And yeah, absolutely, we have partnerships with a number of different community partners, whether it's the police department or Yavapai County Regional Medical Center or this organization that brings therapy dogs in. And there's a time and a place for that. And those types of things can help students to get grounded and refocus and move forward. So are we fond of things that can potentially become interruptions to our main focus? No, frankly. Is there a place for things that help kids keep their focus on our main focus, academics? Absolutely there is, and I'll continue to be supportive of that in the proper time and place.
Okay, thank you for that. This is a question that actually was submitted by the staff who was here at the earlier forum, but I'm going to ask it again anyway. How do you balance your personal beliefs with the law and Prescott USD policy?
I appreciate that question. I think it's important, whether we're here in Prescott or whether we're in Cleveland, Ohio, or someplace else, to have leaders in our school district who generally reflect the values of our community. And I'd like to say I'm a person who does that. I know that we've got a fairly conservative community politically. I think of myself largely the same way. I know we've got a very faithful community. When my wife and I drive to church every Sunday morning, I think we pass 8 other churches on our way. I love that. I love that about our community. That's one of the reasons why I didn't decide to do 8 more years and retire in Japan with a very substantial income there, but we wanted to come home to be here around those types of values. I will tell you, I hope this is not unpopular, and please, visit with me individually if you have concerns, but I'm a very faithful person. I'm a believer in Jesus Christ. I start every morning with prayer and scripture study, and I end every day with prayer as well. That helps to ground me personally and focus on what's most important in my life. That said, am I at liberty to bring those values to school? Absolutely. Am I at liberty to push those values or my specific beliefs on others? No, I'm not, and that's the case for every one of our employees as well. We have some very specific board policy regarding that. There's some very specific state statute regarding that as well. Fortunately, this has not been an issue for us that I've been aware of in my 8 years as administrator in our schools. But there's a time and a place for that, and the values that our teachers largely bring are a very, very positive thing for our schools, but pushing individual religious beliefs is not okay. If you're a Christian like me, this might resonate with you. If we had a Muslim teacher who was pushing their specific beliefs in school, you might be less comfortable with that. And the same is true of somebody who's Christian and is pushing specific beliefs. So we stay away from that, although, again, we try to largely reflect the values of our community. I feel like we, generally speaking, do a good job with that.
All right, thank you for that. So as the superintendent, one of your chief roles is to set the vision, work with your governing board to set the vision for the district. What is your vision for the district?
Well, I've gone on at length on some of these questions, and this one I could talk for the rest of the night, so I'll try to narrow it down to some of the top things. I have a bullet point list of I think there's 10 or 11 different initiatives that I would like to undertake. I will maybe contextualize my answer here by saying first, and I think I essentially said this, I feel like our district has been very well run over the years and continues to be very well run. I'm not inheriting a dumpster fire by any means. We're a very well run district. Are there areas where we need improvement? Unquestionably, that is the case, and we will identify those together and work on those together going forward. But in general, things are going really, really well. So I just want to make sure in most cases that I don't drive the train off the tracks and put us in a situation that we weren't in before. But there are a number of things that I've seen over the years, and I thought, man, if I ever had a little bit more say in the way things go, I would love to work with my governing board and implement things of this nature. One of them, I feel we need to improve our communication with our community. That's fractured a little bit. Our community in general maybe has fractured just a touch over the last few years, and that's certainly been the case with the support that we once broadly enjoyed for our school district. I'm confident that we still have general support, but I'd like to have even more broad support than we have, and I commit to building bridges with the community. I feel like I've been able to do that to some extent on our city council, and I'll take some of the skills that I've learned and practiced there and apply them more broadly to our school district as well. I'd like to be a listener and a communicator in my new role. One of the things we talked about in our last forum was superintendent listening sessions that I'd like to hold regularly to hear from all stakeholders. Certainly, first and foremost, students and parents who are impacted greatly in every aspect every day in our schools, but also our broader community. Every one of us here, I'm assuming, lives within the boundaries of Prescott Unified School Districts. There's 68,000 of us in that category, and all of us pay taxes that help to support our schools. So every one of us should have a voice and a say in what things are done. If we have two diametrically opposed views, are we going to be able to do both of them at the same time successfully? No, but we can bring together and meld what we do hear from people. So listening sessions are important to me. We talked about a couple of names for that. Mrs. Khan, who's on our board, came up with, if it's okay as I share this, came up with Cookies with Clark. I don't know. I'm still trying to process that. It has some potential, but something like that where I sit down with people in the community regularly and hear, what are your concerns and what are your questions and how can you help us as a school district? So that's a piece that I'd like to have. School safety I think, needs to be a huge focus for us going forward. It absolutely has been. You're probably aware that virtually every one of our schools at this point have single point entry. We've got fences that we didn't have years ago, et cetera. And I will point out that, none of us are running around like our hair is on fire and saying, we're unsafe, we're unsafe. Your children are just as safe or more safe in our schools as they are in churches or banks or movie theaters or parks or other places where terrible things have happened in the United States over the years. Statistically speaking, they're safer in our schools than any place they go other than your own home. We want to continue to have that be the case, and we want to further enhance that. So part of it is hardening the target, so to speak. We have great partnerships with our local Prescott Police Department. We've got a student resource officer in the high school right now. We've just received grant funding. We just found out last week for a student resource officer at Mile High Middle School here next year. Super enthusiastic about that. Not only because of the deterrent that it provides, but the opportunity for students to associate with the great people that we have working for our police department and see these are terrific men and women. Maybe I could do that. They're kids who see how great our law enforcement officers are much less likely to do things that put them on the opposite side of the table, so to speak, from law enforcement officers. So we're very enthusiastic about that. We have a number of different things that with our district safety coordinator, et cetera, that we'd like to do going forward. That'll be a focus of mine for sure. As I mentioned earlier, we need to get deeper into academic success, particularly with our math scores. We're not satisfied and going to sleep saying, man, we're rocking it in every area on anything, but particularly math. There's a gap, again, between where we once were and where we are now, and where our other subjects are being tested at and where math is being tested at. Is it a terrible tragedy? It's not. We're in the top quarter of all districts in Arizona, I mentioned earlier, but we need to see why there's a gap between those others too. So without beating the treadmill down with a sledgehammer immediately, we should start plugging it into different plugs in the garage and see what is it about this that can help it function better. So those are three. I've got 7 other things I won't take your time with now, but you're welcome to get with me individually afterwards, and or, as I say, when we do cookies with Clark or whatnot, happy to share more of those things.
Thank you. What I heard you say is this is the beginning of a conversation, not the end of a conversation, which is a wonderful thing. Thank you for being willing to stand up there and be grilled by your community. Thank you all for investing your time and being here tonight. You're part of the success of the school district, and this is a wonderful way to show how much you care. With that said, I again want to thank you for being here tonight. Thank you, sir, for the questions. We wish you the best of luck in your future as the superintendent of the Prescott Unified School District. And have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate it.